He definitely had a type and they were grannies. What's up guys, welcome back to day 2 of 10 days of horror. Today we are going to be looking at the granny killer. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, and if you like this content, subscribe for more and turn on post notifications. So we are going to be traveling to Sydney, Australia to meet this granny rape. On the 1st of March 1989, 82-year-old Gwendolyn Mitchell was found just in front of her apartment, where some two boys that had come to visit their friends just walked outside and saw her shaking and in a pool of her own blood. Like, she was still alive when they arrived, but soon after they called the police and the ambulance, soon after they arrived, Gwendolyn passed away. And these boys were absolutely shaken because these are school kids and she lived in that apartment. They always pass by and she always hands them sweets and candy, so it was just really shaking for them to see her in such a terrible condition. And after she was carried away by the ambulance, her neighbors decided to clean the area because it was still an apartment. Of course, it's going to scare people who are coming over, but also probably out of respect for her, they just cleaned the area where everything had happened, thinking that it's an old lady and she might have just had a really bad fall. When the police arrived there, her pantyhose had been removed and she had not been raped, but they just felt like the person who did that to her just felt like leaving her in a sexually degrading manner, which does not make sense coinciding to a fall, because when you fall you don't take time to do this. And also, after she died, a postmortem was done and they found out that she had a really big bruise to the head. So the doctor figured that she could not have fallen, because if she fell she would have probably had it to the side, she wouldn't just fall backward. And so the doctor concluded that she must have been hit from the back of her head with something. Also, it was impossible to investigate because no one had seen the crime happen. And the crime scene had been cleaned up, and the police had realized that $100 was missing from her purse that was just lying next to her. On the 9th of May in the same year, just 2 months after the first attack, the next attack happened, where I like how this name sounds, Lady Winfreda Isabel Ashton. It sounds so classy. Yeah, Lady Ashton was attacked by a man when she was coming back from a nearby store. She was just walking by the road and he took his gloves and hammer and followed her quietly until she was around the foyer of her apartment, where he then attacked her and started hitting her with the hammer. And he actually said she almost overpowered him, so he just fell on her and bashed her head on the pavement. Like, it's just horrible. And she was 84 years old, so he bashed her head to the pavement and then did not kill her that way, took off her pantyhose and used that to strangle her. And when he was done with everything, he left her stick and her shoes right next to her and took her purse, which contained $100. The police arrived and found Lady Ashton lying face down, and her legs were crossed, her pantyhose were still tied around her neck, and it was so tight that it had actually cut through her skin already. And her purse had been taken away, and it was still on Military Road, around the same area. So the police figured out that they were dealing with a serial killer who killed older women who were well off, and he ran away with their purse. Postmortem examination was done and the doctor realized that there were more scratches on her. She had even bitten her lips while during the struggle, so the lining of her inner mouth was hurt. And they also noticed that her diamond ring was still on her fingers, so it was obvious that the person was not doing this for the money. And the police realized they already have 2 victims. The media got wind of it and the police just knew they were dealing with a serial killer, so they started a wide range search around the area. During the search, police got some eyewitnesses that said they had seen the women close to someone that looked unkempt, had bad teeth, and that seemed to be young, and together with a profile result that said this might be a young person who has issues with someone who is elderly, because they are targeting elderly women. And because there was this high school just around it, they figured that the criminal doing this police might be a young kid who has the time to carry out such activities during the day. During the Ashton's examination, they discovered that she had not been sexually assaulted, and together with the fact that the road had been cleaned off, had been washed off, thinking that she had just fallen, there was no evidence for the police to work with. So during this guy's pastime, when he had nothing to do, like he was not committing murders, he had a few other things that kept him busy. On June 6th that same year, less than a month after Lady Ashton's murder, a 77-year-old Marjorie Mosley at a retirement home reported to the nurses that a man had put his hand under her nightgown and touched her inappropriately, but she does not remember how he looked like, so she just reported that to the staff. On the 24th of June, just a few weeks after the previous incident, he went to another nursing home just close by and went to the first patient's room, slid his hand under her dress and fondled with her butt, and in the next room he slid his hand under another patient's dress and stroked her breasts. So she screamed, and that's when a hospital staff got him and they just talked to him a bit, but like nothing was done. He was able to escape from that. What is wrong with this guy? He visited another nursing home on the 6th of October and ran his hand up another blind patient this time, and she screamed and the nurses came over, but he pretended to be a doctor and he was able to have escaped before the nurses could arrive, and so no one suspected him of all the molestation. On the 18th of October, just a few days after he had done that, he followed an 86-year-old woman called Doris Cox, and she was walking along Spit Road and walking down the stairs. When it was secluded and there was no one around, he grabbed her from behind, bashed her face to the side of the wall, and she fell down. So he thought probably she was dead, or I don't know, maybe he probably figured that she had died and he decided to leave her there and then run off. Or maybe someone came in and caught him because he left her there and she actually did not die. She survived. And he did not try to take off her pantyhose, so I'm not sure what happened there. But when she was found, she was taken to the hospitals, and obviously our good old neighbors cleaned the area thinking that she had just fallen because she was on her way back to a retirement village. When she was out of it at the hospital, she tried to assist the police. She felt like it was a young man or a skateboarder. She just could not remember the details of the person's face because first she was attacked from behind and second she had dementia, so she was unable to give the police a proper description. On the 2nd of November, this guy passed an old lady and was polite to her, started a conversation with her, and actually decided to help her carry her groceries upstairs. She went up with him and felt like this was a normal, nice guy, being nice to an old lady. So she went up with him and actually offered to give him a cup of tea because he had helped her bring her groceries up. When he declined and decided to walk out of that house quietly, and you think, okay, maybe he's coming to his senses, but on his way back from escorting an old lady, he met another victim and just decided to do his thing. 86-year-old Margaret Paul was coming back from grocery shopping when someone attacked her and hit her with a blunt object. When she had fallen to the ground, he hit her again to the neck and then arranged her body neatly, put her walking stick and her shoes next to her, and made away with her purse. And just a few minutes after, a schoolgirl who was returning from school found something just lying down, and in her mind she felt like, okay, it was a pile of maybe clothes or something. And when she got closer, she realized it was a person who was lying down in blood, and she screamed and called for help. When the police arrived, the ambulance arrived and took her, but she was already dead. And neighbors washed away the scene, thinking that this old lady had also fallen to her death, and the police still had nothing to work with. The attacker had made away with $300 from her purse and thrown the purse somewhere around. During the postmortem examination, they found out that the injuries were caused by some blunt object, but they were unable to pinpoint what object could have been causing such injuries. And obviously, they felt like these crimes were all related, and all they had was a sketch of this young guy that they had no idea who he was. And the police was getting so much pressure from the public, from the media. In part of my mind, I'm like, They were getting this pressure from the public who was talking about old women being killed, and they kept watching all the scenes thinking that they were false. Like, it's just crazy. But the police was getting so much pressure from the media and from the public, expecting them to solve this crime, and they were working endlessly trying to solve this. And just 24 hours within the murder of Margaret, the next murder occurred on the 3rd of November that same year. On the 3rd of November, a 21-year-old Olivia Clifton was sitting just outside her retirement home and relaxing when she found a man coming to try and chat with her. When she felt uncomfortable with the conversation, she decided to go back into the main building to her apartment, where he followed her, just crept behind her. He placed his hand over her mouth to stop her from screaming, and then he attacked her with a hammer, and she fell to the ground, where he tried to take off her pantyhose, but when he tried, she was beginning to regain consciousness, so he hit her again with a hammer until she passed out. Then he took out her pantyhose, strangled her to the neck, and then he arranged her shoes next to her, checked around, and got away with $60. When the staff found her, they placed her in an in-house mortuary and then cleaned the entire scene before calling the police, and they just believed that she had just had another fall. And it was so frustrating for the police because they knew exactly what had happened, and the media knew as well, so they just did not know what to do. The profiler felt like the reason why this guy used the pantyhose out of everything he could probably use to strangle them was because he just wanted to humiliate those women, and he felt like it was because his own personal life, he had a rough relationship with elderly women in his personal life, so he felt like sexually humiliating them, and that gave him power and gave him the authority, like he had sexually assaulted them. It just was a weird way to satisfy all of his sick needs. He also said that he felt like this guy had some sort of police training, because to be able to do what he was doing quietly and neatly, that's why he has been able to escape each time. This made the police work difficult for them, because every time they tried to meet someone and question them, they were always like, hey, how am I sure you are not the killer? And it was just difficult for the police at some point. The police established a task force to help them find this killer, and they spent a lot of time. Some people were working overtime just trying to be on guard. They tried to go undercover and be at different nursing homes, because that's exactly where he was getting most of his victims. Be at different nursing homes, try to instruct elderly women how to keep themselves safe and how to be out of trouble or stuff like that. They just tried to protect these elderly women as much as they could, and they were spending a lot of time doing it. The task force was doing everything that it could, but on the 23rd of November, the killer struck again. 93-year-old Muriel Falconer, who is actually partially blind and deaf, was coming back from shopping when this killer saw her and decided to grab his hammer and glove, and he attacked her from behind just when she opened the door to get into her house. He attacked her from behind and hit her with the hammer, took out her pantyhose and used that to strangle her, and looked around her house and found $100, and that is all he took from her. The next day, her neighbor realized that she had not collected her papers, and so she decided to go and try to check, and was able to get in with a spare key. She was actually really close with this neighbor, because the neighbor had warned her previously after seeing everything that had happened on the news and seeing that she's old. The neighbor had actually tried to warn her to always close her door, to be on guard and be on alert, but Muriel just told her that if someone breaks in, they are coming to look for money and she's going to give them, and so she always left her back door open at night. So when the neighbor came in, she knew exactly what had happened to her neighbor, so she knew this was not an accident, and so she called the police, and the police were finally able to get some forensic evidence from that. And by this time, it was by Christmas, the reward for any good information that can lead to catching this granny killer was already at $200,000, and after this next murder, it was increased to $250,000 by the government. At the crime scene, the police were able to find some bloody footprints, and the type of shoe was not something a younger person would wear, and so the police knew that they had been looking in the absolutely wrong direction, because those type of shoes is not something that a younger person would wear. And they had always thought this killer was a young student or a skateboarder or someone who was young. Even the sketch that they had was pointing towards someone who was much younger. So the police had that, and they did not want the public to know that, because the granny killer himself, is going to find out. So they decided to grab a muddy footprint from around and be like, hey, we finally got this person. He was wearing a muddy footprint and we are trying to catch this. So in his mind, the police tried to throw him off as far as possible, and so the media will also have something to talk about. And they spoke with Muriel's neighbor not to tell anyone about the shoe that they had actually found, because the criminal could actually throw it away, and it's going to be super important for them when they finally catch him. Although the police had a crime scene, they were not going any further with the investigation. There was nothing that they could really say, so they went back to Muriel's neighbor to try and get her to tell them anything she might have seen. And she was able to say around that day she had seen a gray-haired middle-aged man around the area, but that's all she could remember. So she gave them the description of this gray-haired middle-aged man that she had seen. With that, the police went back and try to find previous crimes committed by any middle-aged gray-haired man. They found some, including another granny who had actually moved away from that area, but while she was in the area, she had been attacked by a man who had bashed her head to the side of the wall and ran away with her purse. Since then, she had moved from there, so she was not really up to speed with what was going on. So the police went to her and were able to talk to her, and she gave them a very good detailed description of this guy. So now the police had a really good sketch for someone they could be looking for. The police were also able to meet another victim who had been punched in the chest on her way back to a retirement village, and the guy had made away with her handbag and run away in a blue car, and she was able to describe him perfectly: a middle-aged gray-haired man who is not so tall, had a thick shoulder and a pot belly, and she just described the same person that Margaret had described. So the police were bringing everything together. And actually the first person they visited, Margaret, she had to have stitches on her head when she was attacked, and this other lady, she had sustained serious injuries. So this guy was really violent. So the task force is trying to follow up all the leads that they could possibly have on this gray-haired guy, so they can try and identify him, while the guy still continues to do what he does at nursing homes. One of the times, the patient he was trying to abuse screamed, so a nurse went to the room, saw him escaping, and she was able to grab his license plate while his car drove off. The next day, she called the police, and the police went over, and this was not the task force police, just regular reporting a crime. And the police went over, spoke with her, were able to get the license plate, and so they realized this guy was John Wayne Glover. They went to him and tried to talk to him about visiting that nursing home and trying to assault someone, and he said he was not going to talk to anyone without his lawyers present. So they said, okay, fine, meet us tomorrow at the station with your lawyer so we can talk about this. So the next day, the regular police are waiting for him at 5 p.m. to come there with his lawyer and talk about this. But 1 hour later, he does not show up. So they decide to call his home, where his wife picks up the phone and said, because of the crazy accusation against him, he had actually attempted suicide and he was at a hospital. The police went over and tried to find out what happened, and that's when they saw his suicide note. Don't try to understand, no more grannies. Don't try to understand, U.S.C started this, and U.S.C that he's referring to is the mother of his wife. So because he had just attempted suicide, the doctors did not allow the police to be able to question him at that time. But I mean, granny on the suicide note, the police did not put it together. That's just it. So the police were able to ask him, okay, can I take a photo of you? And they were able to take a photo of him to go and show the nurses at the nursing home to see if he was the guy who had attacked them. And sure enough, he was the one. So the police filed everything and just kept it, because one of the officers had to go and do a 2-week training program. After coming back from the 2-week training program, then he felt like, okay, maybe this case is going to have something to do with the granny killers, and that's when he brought out those files. Comparing the picture they had taken of Glover with the sketch that he had, it was just a perfect fit. And seeing the Susanna talking about no more grannies, the police knew, the task force knew they had found their prime suspect. And so they tried to follow Glover, but he was becoming suspicious of them, so they decided to track his car instead and give him some distance. Yeah, so let's talk about Glover himself for a bit. Glover was born on the 26th of November 1932 and was an English Australian man. Glover had had a troubled relationship with his mom since she was having a lot of boyfriends and had different husbands. He had already started committing crimes when he was the age of 15. He had actually left school early because he wanted to join the army, but he was later on kicked out of the army when they found out all the little crimes he had committed before joining the army. In 1957, he decided to move to Australia, and while he lived there, the police, doing a background check, realized that he had been convicted for 2 counts of indecent assault to women, 5 counts of larceny, and 2 counts of injury. And later on, he decided to get married to his wife in 1958. He and his wife had decided to move to Sydney, and they lived in a house with her parents, but he did not get along properly with her mom, who was the U.S.C. he mentioned in his suicide note. Living in the same house, they just never got along. But before the granny killing started, John's mom had died. She too had moved to Australia, but she had died of breast cancer, and also his wife's mom had died. So all this bad relationship, I guess he was just taking it out with any granny he met. Back to the murders. After the police realized these guys are real suspect, they are going to their personal investigations while trying to track him. They are also going and doing personal investigations, and seeing that they got this lead from him going to assault someone at a nursing home, they decided to visit other nursing homes to see if maybe he had committed more crimes there. And one of the nursing homes that the police visited, the guy was like, they spoke with the secretary and she was like, hey, they just said what they are trying to investigate, and we're trying to say, have you seen a gray-haired man here? Try to describe him a bit. And she was like, yeah. So is his name John Wayne Glover? And the police is like, wow, this is awesome. So he must have committed a crime here for them to really know him this well. But the next words was like, yeah, he's my husband. And then the police knew they were effed, because she can tell her husband about what's going on, that he's being investigated. And so even though he had suspicions, now he has proof that he's being investigated. And the crazy part is his wife believed that he had done nothing wrong, and the police were just looking for someone to dump this stuff on, and they were blaming him for nothing. So she went back and told her husband that was the investigation that was going on about him, and she decided to actually hire her own lawyer for him. Sure enough, his wife had told him everything that was going on, and 4 days after this happened, the police are still tailing him, and he called his work that day telling them he's not going to show up, and left and bought some drink and went to some house where he just knocked the door, and the owner of the house, John Sinclair, opened the door for him and let him in. It seemed like they knew each other clearly, and the police were just watching from afar, and there was nothing that they could do. But they stayed there for hours, and they saw there was no movement in the house. Everything was just quiet, so they were beginning to get worried. Maybe they had literally watched him go and have an escape route somewhere. They just were worried, so they knew they had to get into that house, and they needed to find a reason to get into the house. Sure enough, a few minutes after, some kids came and knocked at the door, and no one answered, so they moved on and went to the next door, and the police knew at the point that something was wrong. Also, Sinclair's dogs had been barking, so the police decided to use that as an excuse to show up at this apartment and try to knock. So they knocked the door and no one responded. They went round, and it seemed it was unlocked because they opened and were able to find a hammer and saw the 60-year-old body of Sinclair lying on the ground. And immediately the police called the leaders of the Granny Killer Task Force. Detectives working on this case walk into the house with their guns out because they already knew this was a crime scene and something is going on down there. And they found Sinclair. She was already dead, and they kept searching, where they found Glover in the bathroom. Were they having an affair? Did he come there to die with his love? Because he had taken a bottle of scotch with a lot of pills trying to end his own life. So he had killed her and was trying to end his own life. Police also found a broken glass he had used to try and slit his wrist. So he was really attempting to commit suicide that day, but he had thrown up, and because he had thrown up, all of the pills that were supposed to kill him did not kill him, so he was rushed to the hospital and he survived. So apparently this St. Clair lady was his companion. I don't know if he was his friend or he was having an affair with her, but he had planned to take her out for lunch that day, but instead he decided to make her his last murder, because he killed her in a similar manner in which he had killed all the other grannies. Tied her pantyhose around her neck, strangled her, and used a hammer to hit her with. So when the police saw the hammer, they realized this has been the blunt object that has been used in all the previous crimes. But there must have been something that he put on the hammer, because the injuries that it caused were not so damaging, they were blunt, so he must have put something on the hammer before using it to hit his victims. That's why the police were not able to discover immediately that he had been using a hammer. So after regaining consciousness the next day, the police decided to try and talk to him what about the murders and everything, and he just started bringing out similarities between his mother-in-law and all of the victims that he had killed. So they called for the head investigators of the granny killings, and Glover gave them a full confession, and he just, when you know a recipe to make a cake or something, that's how he was explaining it to them off the top of his head, easily, like a full-blown conversation. Like, he did not just kill grandmothers, old women, defenseless old women. That's how he did it. He just told them about the confession and they wrote it down, and he signed every single page. Even though his wife had called for the lawyer, he had told the lawyer no, he wanted to get this off his chest, and he signed every single page of the confession. The police went to search Glover's house, and they found the shoe that had that footprint that he had left at Muriel's house. And this is funny, the police took him around to the different murder scenes, and he explained to the police how he did it at the different spots. He just told them everything. So sick. Glover also confessed to the police that after taking the money from these victims, he was going to go to the bar and buy drinks for everyone that he met at the bar, and even elderly people. He would just buy drinks for everyone and was like Santa. Okay, so during the trial, his defense tried to play that he had built out hostility against his mom throughout his time growing up, and later on against his mother-in-law, who was someone whom he saw like the mom who triggered him. And when the mother-in-law died, he decided to start taking out that aggression on older women. But the prosecution argued to that he was very well aware of what he was doing, because you have to be sick to be doing something like that to defenseless old women. But the prosecution argued that he was very well aware of what he was doing, because he took out the time to cover the hammer with something, clean off that hammer every time, because he used the same hammer for all the murders, and he took out the time to cleanly pick out their pantyhose and just left them in a sexually degrading manner, used it to strangle them, and used the glove to commit all of these murders. So he knew exactly what he was doing. If he had taken out the time to use hydrochloric acid to wash out the hammer and then wash it with water and then burn the glove he had used for that murder, and to carry that hammer with him all the time to make sure he had something on him whenever he needed to just kill the next victim, he'll run to his car, get the hammer, and just carry out the next activity. So he knew exactly what he was doing. Just after a few hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty because he had 6 victims. They gave him 6 life imprisonment sentences. So he was supposed to serve 6 life imprisonments consecutively. Even though he was spending life imprisonment and he had been convicted for these murders, detective believed that he was responsible for at least 7 other murders and a lot of assaults. So the police kept visiting him and trying to get him to confess about these murders, but he never got anything out of him. And during the last visit that he had with him, he had drawn something, and the detective saw there looked like a number 9. So we are not sure if it's that his total number of victims were 9, or if he had killed 9 other people aside from the 6 people that were already found. So there's no conclusion on that. And on the 9th of September 2005, being the coward that Glover was, did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison. He decided to hang himself and take his own life. What are your thoughts on this case? Let me know in the comments, and see you tomorrow on day number 3 with 10 days of murder. And remember to always do the right thing. See you tomorrow with another video just like this. Goodbye.